The hits just keep on coming against P. Diddy, with a string of new civil lawsuits filed against the embattled music icon just this week. But Diddy isn't the only one who's facing some major allegations. Two of his sons, Justin and Christian Combs, are both name-dropped in several civil suits that list Diddy as a defendant.
The collapse of Sean Diddy Combs' empire was never going to stop with him. We always knew the shockwaves would hit his inner circle, but the latest reports, the new civil litigation emerging from the wreckage, reveal a deeply disturbing truth. Diddy and his sons are now dragged into a new.
The allegations against 54-year-old Sean Diddy Combs have dominated headlines for more than a month, and he spent most of that time at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, held on some pretty severe federal charges. Just last month, he was indicted by a grand jury on charges of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. By now, you're familiar with the allegations against Diddy, from gun and drug trafficking to running a years-long sex trafficking scheme. There's honestly too many allegations against him to list. According to some reports, there are thousands of people who say they were assaulted by Diddy. All that remains to be seen, but we do know there are more than a dozen civil suits already filed against him, with more than 100 new suits expected to follow. The pattern throughout all these lawsuits is eerily similar. Diddy and his team would allegedly drug or spike the drinks of victims before Diddy and sometimes others sexually assaulted them. There are also allegations that Diddy forced these victims to have sex with prostitutes as he touched himself. He called these situations freak-offs, and oftentimes he recorded them. Here's where some of the allegations against his son Justin Combs come in. So all this takes us back to February, when Rodney Jones, also known as the producer Lil Rod, filed civil suit against Diddy. In his lengthy lawsuit, Lil Rod straight name drops Justin Combs, describing him as someone who solicits prostitutes, underage girls, and sex workers. There's actually a picture of Justin Combs with an allegedly underage girl shown in the lawsuit. Now, in this specific instance, Lil Rod alleges at least one underage girl came to Diddy's home for a listening party. A sex worker was also apparently solicited, and a freak-off ensued. As an aside, this is the same night that Lil Rod alleges Diddy forced him to take a laced shot. He started to feel lightheaded and then woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning, naked next to a sex worker. It's important to note Justin Combs is listed as a defendant on this case because, according to Lil Rod, he facilitated Diddy's alleged RICO enterprise and at times participated. Lil Rod's civil suit points to more accusations against Justin Combs too, for his involvement in an alleged shooting cover-up. According to court documents, it happened on September 12, 2022, outside Diddy's Chalice Studios. Lil Rod says Diddy, his son Justin, and Justin's friend who went by G were all there when things got heated. Lil Rod says he heard multiple gunshots ring out and later found G on the bathroom floor in the fetal position. Lil Rod says he was bleeding out of his hip and leg area. Lil Rod says he was applying pressure to G's wounds and then asked the crowd to call an ambulance. At that point, both Diddy and Justin Combs disappeared to another part of the studio. Diddy then gave strict instructions to inform the police that he had nothing to do with the shooting. He also forced Mr. Jones to lie to the police by telling them that G was shot standing outside the studio by a drive-by assailant. So that specific allegation involves Diddy's son Justin, but another allegation and entirely separate civil lawsuit involves his other son Christian, or King Combs. Grace Omar K alleges that Christian Combs sexually assaulted her on a yacht in December 2022, and she says it was facilitated by Diddy. Diddy had rented the yacht around Christmas time, and Omar K says it was a revolving door of high-profile celebrities and sex workers who were often passed out on the ship's deck. The lawsuit says there were liquor bottles all over, and it was difficult to distinguish which ones were laced with drugs. Omar K alleges that on December 28, 2022, while working as a yacht deckhand, she was sexually assaulted by a heavily intoxicated Christian Combs, who physically assaulted her and allegedly forced her to perform oral sex on him. Since these suits were filed, both Justin and Christian Combs were seen in federal court at their father's appearance just last week. But could they too face charges? Here's where we bring in former federal prosecutor Nima.
Complex web of cases that expose the dark, toxic secrets of the entire family dynasty. This is not about an estranged business partner or a distant acquaintance. This is about the very bloodline of the Combs legacy, the wealth, the parties, the unchecked power that Diddy wielded for decades. It was all shared, all present in the lives of his children. Now, As the father faces over 4 years in federal prison for prostitution-related charges, the sons are standing in the dock, facing deeply serious allegations that suggest the darkness Diddy created was tragically inherited or, worse, enabled. The focus is now squarely on Christian King Combs and Justin Combs. Multiple civil lawsuits have emerged, filed by victims who allege not just Diddy's misconduct, but the active involvement or knowledge of his immediate family. The most shocking case involves a lawsuit against Diddy and his son, Christian King Combs. A former stewardess aboard a yacht chartered by Diddy for a family vacation filed a lawsuit alleging that Christian sexually assaulted her in 2022, but the lawsuit does not stop there.
Romani. So, talking about P. Diddy, I know we're talking about the crazy amount of allegations against him that are pretty shocking just unto themselves. But then there's also two of his children whose names have come up a bit throughout some of these civil lawsuits. We've seen headlines, both Justin and Christian Combs. Just to start right off the bat, what are you thinking about that? The inclusion of both of Diddy's sons and the accusations against those two?
I think that if we're talking about additional charges and additional defendants, those are probably two of the more likely. And Christian, of course, was the subject of a civil lawsuit where there was a sexual assault allegation naming him directly. So I think if we're going to cast a bit of a wider net, people are talking about family members, other celebrities, maybe some employees like Christina Forum, but I think the most likely would be those two sons.
Why do you think it's the most likely about those two? Just because of the recordings, the allegations against him? What are you thinking?
I think so. I think obviously they're just civil allegations, and those cases are going to be put on hold while the criminal case plays out. But there is some smoke there, and obviously, there's a presumption of innocence, and there's a lower standard in a civil case. But you have someone who's been named directly as someone who participated in a sexual assault, and everything else has been rumors and speculation. But here you at least have one verified complaint.
And you know what's interesting about this situation? It's the sexual assault civil allegation filed by Grace O'Marquez. This is against Christian Combs, as you're referring to it. And Diddy is a co-defendant in this case because she says he facilitated it. It was on a yacht that Diddy had rented. But it was Christian, the one who allegedly sexually assaulted her. I mean, so how does all of that relate? The fact that we have Diddy, who's also part of this, but it's mostly on Christian in this instance?
Yeah, in this particular instance, like you said, it did take place on a yacht. She was someone who was working at the time, and Little Rod was there apparently, and obviously he's a plaintiff in a civil lawsuit himself. But whenever you are a plaintiff in a civil case, you obviously want to go after someone with the ability to pay. That's what we call a deep pocket. So even though Diddy might not have personally participated in this alleged incident, you really want to wrap him in as a co-defendant because obviously his ability to pay any judgment is going to be very different than Christian or Justin or any of the other of the 7 children.
Do you think that Grace O'Marquez, the plaintiff in this yacht criminal or civil lawsuit rather, do you think that the feds would reach out to her and ask her about her experience perhaps?
I do, and this is why. Apparently, and obviously I haven't heard them, she has recordings of this incident, audio recordings, and we know how powerful video evidence is. We've talked about it with Cassie Ventura and how that really maybe even shift the direction of this case entirely because, of course, Combs denied everything until CNN got a hold of that video in May. And we're talking about a lawsuit that was filed in April, I believe, and again, I don't know if it's true, but the allegations are that much of this was recorded and there's audio recordings. And if so, and she's saying no, and Christian is moving forward anyway, then you have attempted sexual assault.
Talking about audio and video recordings, that's what's huge in this case. I mean, we heard a lot about it from Cassie in her lawsuit, then, of course, Lil Rod, and now confirmed in the federal indictment that the feds are saying, yep, we've got some, and that's what led to this indictment and his charges. But what's interesting is that in Lil Rod's lawsuit, he actually has photos, like screenshots of a recording of Justin Combs, and he says it's allegedly with a sex worker. Do you think that part is incriminating too, that the feds may be looking at that?
It names Diddy as a co-defendant, alleging that Sean Combs created the conditions that led to the assault and then actively sought to cover up the crime afterward, using his wealth and influence to silence the victim and the crew. This is the dark family secret now exposed, the allegation that the very culture of reckless indulgence, sexual coercion, and impunity, a culture Diddy defined, was not only passed down to his children but was actively maintained and protected by him. The suit claims that Diddy had full control of the boat, was aware of the rampant drug use and the constant presence of sexual exploitation, and fostered an environment where the alleged assault could not only happen but would be dismissed and covered up with cash. But the allegations don't end with Christian. Justin Combs has also been named as a defendant in a separate, equally disturbing civil lawsuit. This case involves a woman who alleges Justin used his father's celebrity status to lure her to Los Angeles with the promise of a job. Once there, the lawsuit
Recording?
I do. And during Combs' initial appearance before the new judge Subramanian, there was some discussion of this, and Christian and Justin were in court as well, supporting their father. But the feds were talking about the 96 different electronic devices they seized and the terabytes and terabytes of data. Now, some of it might not be relevant, but some of it may be very much on point, because going back to Cassie's original allegation, Combs reportedly recorded many of these sex acts. It might have been for his sexual pleasure. It might have been to maintain control over their participants. But whether it's a voluntary recording, whether it's a hotel security camera, whether it's something that Lil Rod, took in a still video or a recording, or whether it's something that, a civil plaintiff, a victim of sexual assault, I try not to name them, even though she did out herself in the complaint, took without the knowledge of Christian or others. It's all very, very powerful, because oftentimes when you're dealing with sexual assault and sexual abuse, these are things that happen behind closed doors, right? Could be at a home, could be at a hotel. In this case, could be on a yacht. And usually there aren't a whole lot of witnesses to it. So you will have a he said, she said type situation in many, many cases. Well, a recording can really change that narrative, because, again, it can really corroborate the story of one side or the other.
In regards to Justin specifically and these alleged recordings, audio, all of that. So that's in relation to Lil Rod's lawsuit. He's actually a co-defendant listed quite a few times throughout this. And in addition to him sitting next to this alleged prostitute, we have that photo. There's also allegations that he actually partook in these freak-offs and potentially drugged women. This is something Lil Rod is saying. How would the feds go about proving something like that? I know that's the pattern we've seen across a lot of these civil suits, that women allege Diddy, for instance, drugged them. But now Lil Rod's also pointing the finger at Justin Combs, saying he drugged some of these women. How would the feds then go to look further into that?
Yeah, Lil Rod's lawsuit is interesting in that there are many defendants. We talked about Christina Horam, right? Some of the allegations that came out in Lil Rod's lawsuit was Christina, of course, being Combs' right-hand woman. She allegedly had the fanny pack with the drugs that were provided to the sex workers, or that there are the allegations directly against Justin as well. So whenever you're proving something like this, obviously, you're going to rely on the testimony of witnesses. It could be an independent witness, because the sex workers, even though they're participants in a sex act, they won't necessarily be charged, or I don't think they're going to be defendants in the lawsuit, if the allegation is that they were forced to perform these sex acts and it wasn't just a commercial transaction. So you can rely on that testimony. Obviously, Lil Rod himself, but he's a plaintiff, so his testimony may be biased, may be true, but it's certainly something that you would want more of if you are a prosecutor. And then you look to video and you look to other types of evidence, maybe text messages, something that corroborates what Lil Rod has said. And of course, if you have someone like Horam who flips, that would be very, very helpful for prosecutors, because we know that former employees, they usually have a lot of information and they can be leveraged in a criminal case or even a civil one to cooperate to save themselves.
I want to talk more about that, the flipping of all of this, because right now Diddy is the only one who has been charged federally in relation to this scheme, this alleged scheme. But as you pointed out, there are other people who have been identified as participants in all this. Christina Coram obviously is the main one, along with the Combs enterprise or empire, whatever you want to call it. She is not
claimed she was drugged, held prisoner, and subjected to a brutal gang rape in 2017, allegedly involving both Justin Combs, Diddy, and 2 other masked men. Though Diddy's legal team has denied all allegations vehemently, calling the suits baseless and fictitious, the sheer number and consistency of the claims against the family unit, father and sons, paint a devastating picture of generational complicity. The lawsuits collectively allege that Diddy's sons were not merely bystanders but were active participants, benefiting from the same alleged machinery of sex trafficking, drug distribution, and intimidation that is now collapsing Diddy's life. The entire Combs dynasty is under attack, and the stakes are immense. These are not just civil cases seeking financial damages, they are criminal referrals waiting to happen. The exposure of these dark family secrets fundamentally changes the public's perception of the Combs legacy. What we once saw as a hip-hop royal family is now being legally recast as an alleged criminal enterprise that involved not just the mogul, but his heirs.
That does it amplify this message that we've seen online that there's more to Kim Porter's death than meets the eye? I just want to be clear about what this book from your client really says.
So again, I'm going to reiterate, I have not read the entirety of the book. But from what I have read, it does support the allegations that have been made by Cassie, the allegations that have been made by the federal government, and the allegations that have been made by my clients, Tyrone Blackburn's clients, Tony Busby's clients. It's everybody is saying the same thing. And Kim Porter, I feel like we were only willing to hear these things once Cassie came out, and now we are starting to see from Kim Porter's experience that these were the exact same experiences.
So the main question that people would have here is, why would Kim Porter give your client this manuscript? What was that relationship? They were close enough where she would give him her memoir, her diary entries. Why would she do that?
So to my understanding, Courtney was really good friends with Tupac. I'm always trying to explain this. So in New York, we all know the East Coast, West Coast beef, right? Sure. We all have some knowledge of it. It's only cursory. So you have to imagine on the East Coast, there was two factions. There was the Bad Boy faction, and then there was Death Row East. So Death Row was starting to encroach upon Diddy's territory in New York. And there are a lot of people in New York who didn't like Diddy, who didn't want to rock with the bad boy East Coast, side of the East Coast, West Coast beef. So there were a bunch of people in New York, a faction, who were West Coast, East Coasters, if you will. And Courtney was one of those people. So to my understanding, Courtney knew Kim through Tupac and Courtney's a industry insider, A&R, or a record exec who brought different people to labels to help them get into the music industry. So he knew producers, managers, all these people in the music industry. And one day he was talking to a friend who was with Kim, and Kim was like, "Who are you talking to?" And he said, "I'm talking to Courtney B." And she said, "Oh, let me talk to him," because they knew each other through Tupac, and said to Courtney, "I got something because for you, I know you'll know what to do with it." And that's the next day is when Courtney got the flash drives, and one of the flash drives had the book on it. So I believe that if we're going to believe, let's say, that Kim really wanted this book to get out, and she knew there were only certain people she can trust, because there were more people in Diddy's pocket than were not in Diddy's pocket. Why wouldn't you go to his enemy, Diddy's enemy, which is people with the Tupac faction? And if you really want this information to get out, because anybody else is not going to get that information, because their loyalty will always lie to Diddy. So I think, just me using my brain and the information I have been given and my understanding just culturally about what is going on, because it's my culture, it makes sense to me how Courtney ended up with this.
You don't anticipate that this is going to escalate into some sort of lawsuit and this going to court? And it sounds like if it is, you're ready to fight back against it.
Not only fight back, we're ready to countersue for defamation and other things, other torts. But I would invite them. If you're watching this, please, I beg of you, please sue us.
This is not about an estranged business partner or a distant acquaintance. This is about the very bloodline of the Combs legacy, the wealth, the parties, the unchecked power that Diddy wielded for decades. It was all shared, all present in the lives of his children. Now, as the father is incarcerated, serving time for prostitution-related charges, the sons are standing in the dock, facing deeply serious allegations that suggest the darkness Diddy created was tragically inherited or, worse, actively enabled. The focus is now squarely on Christian King Combs and Justin Combs. Multiple civil lawsuits have emerged, filed by alleged victims who detail not just Diddy's misconduct, but the active involvement, presence, or knowledge of his immediate family members. The most shocking case involves a lawsuit against Diddy and his son, Christian King Combs. Grace O'Marque, a former stewardess aboard a yacht chartered by Diddy for a family trip, filed a lawsuit alleging that Christian sexually assaulted her in December 2022, but the lawsuit does not stop with the younger Combs.
He didn't believe her, didn't do any sort of real investigation. She says the captain retaliated against her for months after the alleged assault before ultimately firing her in May of 2023. Now, aside from her account, aside from a potential other witness, right, the person that allegedly walked in on this, what proof is there that this happened? Well, she reportedly has photos of the bruises that she says were caused by this event with Christian Combs. But she also claims that in that studio, during that first interaction at the time, was Rodney Jones, that former Diddy music producer I mentioned, the one who is suing Diddy. He's known as Little Rod Jones. Remember, he had been basically living with Diddy while the two worked on his latest album. As we discussed on previous sidebars, Jones made multiple allegations against Diddy in his own lawsuit, saying that there was rampant drinking, drug use, sexual assault during Diddy's parties. He claims that he was groped by Diddy, that he was the victim of sex trafficking as he was forced to engage in sex acts with sex workers. He even claims that Diddy groomed him for homosexual sex and facilitated for him to be sexually abused by actor Cuba Gooding Jr. He also claims that there are hours of audio and video footage documenting Diddy's alleged crimes and misconduct. And according to Miss O'Marque, Jones taped this event with her. Yes, the lawsuit provides transcripts of audio recordings, and these audio recordings purportedly show, or you can hear, kissing sounds, her telling Combs not to touch her, her allegedly asking about whether she was drugged. Now, we haven't heard these tapes here on Law and Crime yet, but if they are what they purport to be, that is a huge piece of evidence. And remember, when we're talking a civil case, when we're talking lawsuits, the burden of proof is much lower than a criminal case. It's just preponderance of the evidence, more likely than not that this happened. So the civil suit accuses Christian of assault, battery, sexual assault, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. They're a big part of this lawsuit. She goes into the mental anguish that she has gone through, the emotional harm that she has suffered as a result of that. That's important in order to prove damages. And by the way, she is claiming unspecified damages, so she hasn't put a number amount on it. But Diddy, let's go back to him. He is also named as a defendant. He is accused of aiding and abetting Christian's behavior, as well as having premises liability because he was the leaseholder of the yacht. Now, premises liability means that you have a duty to keep people on your property safe from injuries. We actually saw a lot of that same kind of theory in the Jones lawsuit when he was talking about this shooting that happened at Chalice Studios, and the owners and occupiers of that studio should just be as responsible as the people who allegedly engaged in that shooting that he was present for. Now, by the way, not sure if these new allegations could play a role in a future federal criminal prosecution of Combs. We're talking so much about the investigation into them. It could be that this is just an isolated incident.
Critically, it names Diddy as a co-defendant, alleging that Sean Combs created the specific, hedonistic conditions that led to the assault, including the use of drugs and the presence of sex workers, and then actively sought to cover up the crime afterward. The suit claims Diddy gave the captain a large amount of cash, leading to a failed investigation and the stewardess's subsequent firing in retaliation. This is the dark family secret now exposed, the allegation that the very culture of reckless indulgence, sexual coercion, and impunity, a culture Diddy defined, was not only passed down to his children but was actively maintained and protected by him using his financial power and influence. The yacht, chartered for a supposedly wholesome family excursion, was allegedly a vessel of chaos, and the suit holds the patriarch liable for enabling the environment. But the allegations don't end with Christian. Justin Combs has also been named as a defendant in a separate, equally disturbing
Here and could not be part of a sex trafficking charge. Although I do wonder if this Christian Combs incident or alleged incident could be part of a potential RICO or racketeering charge. As I mentioned on a previous sidebar, when I laid out potential charges that Diddy could face, if we are talking about conspiracy to violate the RICO statute, RICO organized crime, that's what I'm talking about here, that there was a criminal enterprise, to prove that, you would need to show that there was an agreement to break the law, there was an agreement to have this criminal enterprise, and that there were steps or overt acts that were taken in furtherance of that criminal enterprise. Overt acts don't even have to be crimes. They could just be events. They could be things that happen. So could this be an example of an overt act? Could this be an overt act to further this enterprise of illegal sex and power? Could be a stretch. Yes, just something that came to my mind. Now, Miss O'Markey, her attorney, Tyrone Blackburn, said after this lawsuit was filed, quote, "Like father, like son, it gives us no joy or pleasure in filing this suit against Christian Combs, who has clearly adopted his father's pattern and practice of depravity." So far, there has been no response from Christian or his attorney at the time of this lawsuit. But a little side note about Tyrone Blackburn, the attorney representing Miss O'Markey and Mr. Jones. United States District Court Judge for the Southern District of New York, Denise Coate, had some very harsh words for Mr. Blackburn and has even submitted a referral to the New York Federal Court Grievance Committee, claiming issues with Blackburn in 5 cases. In her order, she writes, quote, "Significant resources have been spent by judges of the court and defendants named in actions he has filed to address glaring deficiencies in his filings. A referral to this court's grievance committee is warranted." Judge Coate goes on to write, quote, "A reasonable inference from Blackburn's pattern of behavior is that he improperly files cases in federal court to garner media attention, embarrass defendants with salacious allegations, and pressure defendants to settle quickly." She goes on to write, "Indeed, his submissions to this court have been rife with disturbing allegations against the defendants and defense counsel." So the big theme here is that he allegedly files lawsuits in the wrong jurisdictions and courts, and even allegedly called a defense attorney, quote, "a disgusting racist." Now, this is being reported by Billboard, and in fact, Blackburn wrote an email to Billboard responding to Judge Coate's order saying, quote, "Not sure how this is at all relevant to Rodney Jones's case or any other case I have. This will not have any impact on my ability to proceed in Mr. Jones's case. Although Judge Coate's decision was a referral to the SDNY's grievance committee and not a sanction, I plan on appealing the decision." But remember, the Jones lawsuit was filed in the Southern District of New York, a federal court. So it does seem to have some impact, if you ask me. And look, while we don't know the specifics of these allegations, they do come on the heels of other criticism from other lawyers. After Blackburn filed the lawsuit on behalf of Mr. Jones, Combs' attorney, Sean Holley, alleged that Blackburn ignored basically exonerating evidence. The quote was, "Our attempts to share this proof with Mr. Jones' attorney, Tyrone Blackburn."
Civil lawsuit. This case involves a woman who alleges that Justin used his father's celebrity status and connections to lure her from Louisiana to Los Angeles in 2017 with the promise of a job. Once there, the lawsuit claims she was drugged, held prisoner for a weekend in a Beverly Hills home, and subjected to a brutal gang rape allegedly involving both Justin Combs, Diddy, and 2 other masked men. Though Diddy's and his son's legal teams have vehemently denied all allegations, calling the suits baseless, fictitious, and attempts at extortion, the sheer number and consistency of the claims against the family unit, father and sons, paint a devastating picture of generational complicity. The lawsuits collectively allege that Diddy's sons were not merely bystanders but were active participants, benefiting from and allegedly contributing to the same machinery of sex trafficking, drug distribution, and intimidation that is now collapsing Diddy's life. Justin Combs has also been named in a separate lawsuit by producer Rodney Lil Rod Jones, though several of those claims were dismissed by a judge. The entire Combs dynasty is under attack, and the stakes are immense. These are not just civil cases seeking financial damages. They are detailed allegations that the victims' legal teams have publicly stated they believe should be the basis for criminal investigation. The exposure of these dark family secrets fundamentally changes the public's perception of the Combs legacy. What we once saw as a hip-hop royal family is now being legally recast as an alleged organization that involved not just the mogul, but his heirs. The fear now gripping the remnants of the Combs organization is the fear of total ruin. Diddy's conviction already threatens to dismantle his financial assets to satisfy billions in potential judgments. The fear now gripping the remnants of the Combs organization is the fear of total ruin. Diddy's conviction already threatens to dismantle his financial assets to satisfy billions in potential judgments. If his sons are found liable in these civil suits, the entire family fortune will be targeted for liquidation, ensuring that the dark consequences of Diddy's actions will follow his children for the rest of their lives. Diddy is locked away, paying his price to the state, but the more profound, lasting price is being paid by his sons, who are now forced to confront the wreckage of their inherited kingdom. The family secret is out. The rot wasn't confined to the patriarch. It was systemic. And now, the full weight of justice is bearing down on the entire Combs dynasty.